Well, hello there, still becoming. Welcome back to another episode. The episode titled You Don't Have to Be the Hero. Before we get into that, I just want to let you know. Hope you all are following along on Instagram at stillbecoming26. There you'll find the journey of me just still trying to become. And, hopefully that allows most of you, if not all of you, to start thinking about what you could do as you get older. Not just, at 40, but 50, 60. Yeah, I've got other episodes back in the annals of, this show, and there are older people really getting after it still. And so I just want to remind you, you are still becoming, all right? You can do it. You just don't have to be heroic in it. You just have to be consistent. And so as we dive into the episode, you can also follow along wherever you're getting this podcast, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and Amazon. And, let's get into it. This week I want to tell you about a race I ran, yesterday on Saturday. Now before you start thinking, oh, this is going to be one of those episodes where I tell you how amazing I am. Don't worry. That's not where we're going. You know, to be honest, the race itself isn't the lesson. The lesson is what happened before the race. You see, I have this habit. Maybe some of you do, and you want, I want certainty. I want to know, the workouts I'm doing, are they working? I want to know if the training is working. I want to know, you know, uh, will I have a good race? I want to know if I slept enough, if I've been eating, the right things, if my heart rate has, been going the right direction, am I recovering enough? I want to know everything, is lining up exactly the way it should, and if not, you know, hopefully it's not too stressful. Hopefully there's not a lot of anxiety, overthinking, trying to solve a problem that actually doesn't need to be solving. If you're listening to the show any amount of time, you probably, know where this is going, and as I said just a second ago, into stress, anxiety, overthinking, we have a tendency just to kind of destroy ourselves because you want this perfect day to happen. And unfortunately, as I've said and always kind of felt, in this new mindset of mine, I hate that word perfect. It doesn't help anything. It just puts more pressure on you, and the funny thing is, race day reminded me of something I've had to learn over and over again. The things that make us better are usually boring. They're not flashy. They're not heroic. They're not the moments we post online. They're the quiet moments nobody sees. Going to bed early, doing the easy runs when nobody's watching, doing the strength work, taking the recovery days, being patient, being consistent, doing the next thing right, and doing it again and again and again. The night before the race wasn't perfect for me. My sleep wasn't perfect. I woke up, my mind started racing. It was about 2:30 in the morning. I was thinking about the race. I was thinking about coaching. I helped coach, my son's youth program, and just thinking about that stuff. Thinking about life. And at one point, I basically had to tell my brain, "Hey, shh, it's gonna be okay. All right, now's not the time for that. The race isn't for several hours. Can we please calm down?" I'll negotiate with you. If, we'll put on a little movie in our ear and listen to it to help distract the ever so problem solving issues that, we all have where our brains do that. If you'll just go back to sleep, and I was able to negotiate, and get my brain to calm down. And, maybe you've had those nights, not before a race, mind you, this show's about chasing your passion. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a race. It could be before a presentation, before a difficult conversation you've had to have with a loved one, or just at work, right before a big decision as well. Your mind can keep you up at night and make those decisions harder to think through. And sometimes you think solving it at night makes, I have time, but unfortunately, it just makes things a bit more messy when you don't get the sleep you need. You know, those details don't really matter. The feeling is the same. Your brain tries to convince you that if you think hard enough, you'll somehow gain control. But most of the time, all you're doing is borrowing tomorrow's stress and paying interest on it at that moment in time, at that night, today. When the race finally started, I didn't feel magical. We're going back to this race. I didn't feel like some superhero. I didn't feel like I had discovered a secret. I just felt like me, a little nervous, a little excited, a little uncertain. Actually, I should rephrase that a lot of uncertainty. I just didn't know what to expect. And, and honestly, I think that's how most worthwhile things, feel. The race went pretty well, went pretty well in the context of how things have been going training wise. I really felt that, you know, I just felt smooth. That's the only way to say it. And you know, uh, it's really weird to feel like all this stress I've been put on my body has not been fast, and so to feel like I haven't done any of that pace work yet, and to go out there and believe like it's there in the body, that's a very unsettling feeling, and I felt like I really was able to control myself and really just kind of let's just do it, and it was nice. There were moments I felt strong. There were also moments I felt uncomfortable. That final mile coming home, things still felt smooth, but it just, also felt uncomfortable. You're pushing yourself so much. And, I just had to remind myself, stay present. Don't think about your time. Don't think about your splits. We can worry about that at the very end when it's all said and done. Just worry about how you feel in that moment. And right now, you feel smooth. Yeah, you're uncomfortable because you've been pushing, but just run, man. Like, there's really nothing about it. It's just a 5K. You've been putting a lot on your body. This isn't your A race. It's just a test. And this test doesn't mean anything else, just compete. Just be where your feet are. And when I crossed the finish line, I was happy. You know, the time was great. It was 16:35, and I had answered the questions. That's, the 16:35, sure, it tells me where I'm at, but really the race itself was where, I answered those questions of, all right, this is going well. I was happy because I was able to add another brick to this long process that I'm part of. Another piece of evidence, another reminder that consistency works, and I think sometimes we want our lives to change because of some big moment, one big workout, you know, one big decision, one heroic act. But when I look back at almost everything I'm proud of, that's that's not how it happened. It happened because of hundreds of ordinary days. The marathon is the goal I'm chasing. That marathon on October 10th of this year in Southern Oregon. It's that's where the big opportunity is going to happen. For me, and even then, this will not be what defines me. That marathon, it'll just stack another brick. It is a day I'm shooting for, and I really hope it goes well. But again, I can only show up, you can only show up with what the tools you're given and the patience you're given. And so, I would say, this marathon is built on ordinary days. The relationships I care about built on ordinary days. The person I'm becoming built on ordinary days. And honestly, that's encouraging because it means, you or me, it don't have to be extraordinary today. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to feel confident when you're out there. You just have to keep showing up. One day, one workout, one conversation, one decision at a time. I think, that's one of the biggest lies that we tell ourselves. We we think courage, means not being afraid, but courage is usually doing the thing that we're afraid of, or that, well, we're afraid. We think confidence comes first. Most of the time, confidence comes later when you're like, I jumped, I made that jump, and now I can do it again and again. And that's the confidence building. But before then, it's kind of like, I don't know that I can do this. A lot of anxiety built into that, a lot of stress, and we think motivation creates action. Often action creates motivation. The older I get, the more I realize success is usually pretty boring. It's consistency, it's patience, it's repetition, it's trusting the process before you can see the outcome. And that's hard, especially in a world that celebrates dramatic stories, you know, rocky montages, you know, we love our overnight success. We love our miracle transformations. We love our breakthrough moments. But what if the real breakthrough is simply refusing to quit? What if the real superpower is showing up tomorrow? What if the real hero isn't the person who has one incredible day? What if it's the person who keeps having ordinary days and keeps moving forward anyways? That's the lesson this race reminded me of. I'm not that, not that I'm special, not that I've figured everything out, not that anxiety magically disappears. Because trust me, it doesn't. Oh man, I'm such an anxiety person. But anyways, you know, the lesson is that growth is still happening. The lesson is that consistency is still working. The lesson is that becoming never really ends. And maybe that's the point. We're all still becoming. We're all learning. We're all trying. We're all carrying doubts nobody else can see. But if we keep showing up, if we keep taking the next step, if we keep trusting the work we've already done, amazing things can happen. Not overnight, not all at once, but eventually. I want to thank you for making it this far in the episode. I want to thank you for spending a little time with me today. You know, Wherever you are in your journey, keep going. No, you don't have to be the hero. You just have to keep showing up. And always remember, you're still becoming, and you are the only one stopping you. I'll see you all next time. Bye.